Alrighty then. Well, hello everyone, and welcome. It's morning. We're doing this in the morning today, so good morning. Well, if you're in the morning, if you're at night, well, good night. So anyway, we're on today with Amateur Exegete. Welcome,
Thank you.
and RJ may show up. We'll see. It's 8 o'clock where he is, 8 a.m. And so we'll see if he makes it. So you just first, you've been on before, but if any of you are unfamiliar with him, give us just a brief background of yourself. And I did put a link to your blog in the description.
Good. Yeah. So I'm the Amateur Exegete. My name is Ben. So I blog at amateurexegete.com, and my focus is mainly biblical studies, addressing both bad Christian takes on the Bible, bad atheist takes. But that's my primary focus, which is kind of ironic considering that, I'm here going to talk about biology, which is way outside of my area of expertise. Not that I have an area, but So yeah,
I think I don't know. I think you do so much research and work on like biblical studies and Near East studies and all that kind of stuff. You know far more than a lot of people about these areas, and you read like what, Hebrew, Greek, and
yeah, I pretend to. I just get my strong concordance out and I just flip. No, on my desk I keep BHS and my Septuagint and my Greek New Testament, but all my evolution books are behind me on the shelves. Well, I'm on the wrong side. Can you see them?
The empty shelf?
There we go. Yeah, the empty shelves. Actually, I got a few evolution books. See, I got a few really good books that I'd like to recommend. Here's Philip Johnson.
Yes, wonderful.
But no, really, so I got this one handy too. I don't know if you're. Have you seen this book, Jackson? Is this familiar to you?
I've heard it. Someone referred it to me the other day, I think.
Yeah, it's got very, very small print. It makes it really, really hard for me to read with my nearly 40-year-old eyes. So,
ooh. Well, on the plus side, we will actually be going into Darwin's doubt in the next one. We had so many things that were kind of on the chopping block for Rocks 1. We basically mentioned it and said, go read Prothero's overview. We're not gonna dive into it right now because there's so much. So we'll come back to this. We promise.
Yeah, I noticed when I was reading Meyer's book, and I was like, I'm gonna see what Jackson has to say about this. And I was like, oh man, I wish he had said more. So I'm glad you're gonna talk more about it in volume 2. No, that'll be good.
We did do. I have done a few videos. We collectively done a few videos on the Cambrian explosion on my channel. We did Cambrian explosion part 1 and 2, which Cambrian explosion part 1 is one of the most popular videos on my channel, interestingly. And that goes into sort of the ecological and geological background to the Cambrian explosion that was occurring in Ediacara, and then the part 2 is like the actual explosion itself. We've done a couple of videos rebutting Darwin's doubt on at least his major points. For instance, what was the title? My very first sort of spar with a guy named Long Story Short was over Darwin's doubt, and he actually makes animations for the Discovery Institute now. It used to be just him on his little channel, and he was doing his stuff. And then the Discovery Institute kind of swept him up. And so now he makes animations for them. And I mean, in fairness, he makes good animations. It's just too bad they're being used to spread lies. So, And
It's not inflammatory at all.
well, I mean, it is true, but
It's true.
regardless. And then Stephen Meyer was on PragerU giving his Darwin doubt spiel. I don't know if I guess you didn't see that video.
No.
Well, we responded to that, and that was also one of my more popular videos. Someone had actually like messaged me, I found you through Reddit or something like that. And I was like, I don't use Reddit. What are you talking about? And someone had posted it on Reddit, and they came to me from there. I was like, okay, but anyway, so Darwin's doubt, the arguments within it are pretty, I think, well worn at this point.
Yeah, when was this book was written? What?
2013.
Oh yeah, it feels more recent than that.
Well, it was only 8 years ago. Yeah.
8 years is a long time.
That's like 100 years for any other person living before this time period. So.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a lifetime.
I mean, I think I've aged 10 years in the past 4 months. Yeah. Oh, also, hello everyone in the live chat. Welcome. So the funny thing about Darwin's doubt, before we actually get into like his two, sort of main theses. Now, I want your initial reaction. But before we get into those, are you aware they wrote a second book defending Darwin's doubt because of how much bad press it got?
Yeah, I mean, that's never a good sign. Like when you have to, it's like Christian apologists. It's like your interpretation of the Bible is so bad that you got to write out all these books trying to defend it. Maybe you could kind of reassess your life and say, this is not as clear or not as well argued as it probably should have been. But yeah, I knew it existed. But oh my gosh.
Yeah, debating Darwin's doubt. I think it should be titled "Defending Darwin's Doubt" because that's what it is. It's a PR stunt.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had like everybody at the Discovery Institute write a chapter in debating Darwin's doubt.
As you would when you peer review, you only find people that agree with you to critique your materials.
Yeah, and I found interestingly that some of the people who wrote some of the people who wrote responses never got like chapters dedicated to them in debating Darwin's doubt. So Michael Baratovich, for instance, wrote both an argument against and it was on the NCSE's website, both an argument against, or I guess arguments against both of Meyer's main theses, and nobody touched it. Nobody ever touched it. I even looked on Evolution News recently. Still nobody's touched it. I was like, interesting.
Telling, yeah.
And so, So what were your initial reactions upon reading the book? Because you just read it for the first time recently, right?
Yeah, and I read it in tandem with Jerry Coyne's book, Why Evolution is True.
A very good
time
book.
I've read it, and it's just easy to read, clear, concise, just great book. So it's one I recommend to anybody who wants to, look into evolution by natural selection. Mm-hmm. But so what I liked about Meyer's book was the first maybe 100 pages where he goes through a lot of history. I think it's very well written. I think he does a really good job writing. And now I didn't fact check it. A lot of it seemed familiar enough to me that I thought, yeah, this is probably true, but it was very well done. I thought it was very persuasive. And I think it reflected his background as a philosopher of science, someone who's used to writing these kind of works. It's when he gets into parts 2 and 3 where he starts really getting into the science that he just loses me, because I'm not an expert. I'm barely a novice. My knowledge of evolution and in biology generally is just, it's not very good compared to what I would expect from someone who's critiquing it. And he just does not do it well. He relies on analogies too much. I know from reading other reviews, even from other people who are Christians, but they believe in evolution, that he overlooks data, he misrepresents the data. It's just outdated information that he's
Yes.
just not up to date with some of his work. So reading, especially in part 2 where he is critiquing based primarily on his analysis of the Cambrian, but part 3 where he moves to intelligent design. It's where you go, oh, okay. I see what you're doing. I see, especially his last chapter, talk about his son, who's a gung ho idea. I'm thinking, I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing. I understand why you're doing it.
It's
but you're sneaking in God, and
Yes.
that just brings up a whole host of other questions that you're going to have to answer if you want to persuade me or any reader really who's interested in this subject.
Yeah.
So, I the history parts were great. It's just for me, if you're going to get into the science, please be more clear. And it could be just me. Maybe it's just me.
It's not just you. I promise.
Well, it can't be you because you're well versed in this stuff. So anything that you read, you're immediately going to pick up on the subtle nuances. But for someone like me,
I don't know about that.
I read maybe 3 science books a year, and I'm reading the rest is, biblical scholarship. I don't pick up on it as quickly. I have to be more. It takes more work for me to pick up on it. Whereas someone like you, who just knows because you've done so much, it's just like, oh yeah, you see it. It puts me in a kind of a dangerous spot too.
I mean, in fairness, I don't know if you've seen. I'm doing a series on the Ancestor's Tale right now by Richard Dawkins. Very good book. I
have not read it, but yeah, you've recommended it to me a couple times now.
Yeah, it's really good. And so I'm doing a series analyzing each of the tales because it's kind of written like Canterbury Tales.
Mm-hmm.
So as he goes backwards through evolutionary history, he picks different organisms to tell some story, in evolutionary biology, like sexual dimorphism or
The hippopotamus,
the Cambrian explosion,
whale, and
the hippo's tail. That's another one. The evolution of whales, and so, but as I'm doing this series, I'm reading each of the tales, and sometimes I have to do it multiple times because there's a number of chapters which are about like population genetics math, and so I'm not great with math, and so I'm having to like read it again, go look at the actual paper, read the Dawkins again. And so I'm like, okay, I think I see what he's saying.
Well, I'll be interested to see what you have to say about Meyer's, some of the mathematics that he runs in Darwin's Doubt, because that was way over my head. I couldn't say yay or nay about anything.
It's bad. It's real bad. And and you're right. We will get to that. So he's kind of, he breaks his case. He breaks his book sort of into 3 parts. The history is true, but he kind of presents it in a way that's like, aha, the case has been mounting against Darwin since Darwin published. No. It's like for creationists, it's like everything that's new is a problem. Every question you ask is a new problem that totally destroys. No, it doesn't. So like when Charles Doolittle Walcott found the Burgess Shale, and Meyer's like, oh, he never thought maybe it was intelligent design. Yeah, no, because there's no reason to think it was intelligent design. It was, okay, here's a suite of fossils. We didn't know these critters existed, but we now have like evolutionary contexts for like all of them. And there's still no design being invoked by the normal paleontologist. And so it's like, okay.
Why would the default be it must be God? Like, why would that have been the default?
Because complex and lots of complex, therefore God.
Exactly. Yeah.
Andrew Cummings said, is Meyer one of those people who claim that the Cambrian marked the emergence of all of the major clades of Animalia? Yes. So that's his Oh, I forgot. Yeah, I forgot I could do that. Thank you, Peter. um, yes, Meyer's, which actually brings us to Meyer's argument. So Meyer's overall argument is that the Cambrian was too rapid and too much diversity appeared to be explicable under normal evolutionary theory.
Mm-hmm.
Or well, actually, let me rephrase, under neo-Darwinism, which isn't the current evolutionary synthesis, but that's another problem. We'll get to that.
Yeah, I think that's something you should probably talk about, because you and I dialogued by DM a while back where I asked you about that particular question, because it's a term I've read but not very familiar with. So it would be good to kind of lay out what the new paradigm is, so to speak. So
yeah, well, yeah. So briefly, Meyer and his ilk like to use terms like Darwinism, neo-Darwinism, and the evolution or evolutionary theory. Oh yes, we'll do that momentarily, Andrew, because it will relate to what we're going to discuss. So they use those terms all interchangeably. They're not interchangeable. They all mean different things. Darwinism was natural selection plus phyletic gradualism. That was the original synthesis that Darwin himself proposed in 1859 and so on. Right. That's Darwinism, literally based on Darwin. Neo-Darwinism was the conjoining of the new field of genetics with those mechanisms. So basically population genetics with natural selection and phyletic gradualism. You put that together, that's neo-Darwinism. And so, but that was in the 1940s and 50s. We've changed a little bit since then. Because in the years hence, and that was another thing he kind of, that Meyer kind of talks about, is, well, we've proposed other aspects of evolutionary theory. And he kind of goes through these, and he's like, oh, none of these deal with the Cambrian. It's like, a lot of them do to different extents, but none of them are a replacement for evolution. They are additions to the theory. Evolutionary developmental biology didn't replace neo-Darwinism. It was added to neo-Darwinism in the 70s, 80s. Neutral theory was added to the theory. Epigenetics and all the others, they were all added. It's evolutionary theory as a whole is the total framework of evolutionary biology. So all the mechanisms we accept are all part of that. It's not just natural selection.
So sexual selection, would artificial selection be part in that?
Well, I mean,
like,
isn't
artificial selection just natural selection ramped up by humans, right?
It's just breeding, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's but yeah, all the mechanisms, phenotypic plasticity, all that kind of stuff, that's all those are all encompassed by evolutionary theory. So it's not fair to say evolution is neo-Darwinism or Darwinism, because these are both rather outdated.
Well, and I think using neo-Darwinist, especially the moniker neo-Darwinist, to speak of people like Jerry Coyne,
right?
It serves a polemical function. It works in a way that it makes them look antiquated or ignorant, which is ironic considering it's Meyer who's writing. But it's a useful term to use.
Yeah,
regardless of whether it's true. And most of his readership isn't going to pick up on that, because they're not, they're creationists and they don't read science.
Right.
But so I have a question then.
Okay.
Are there neo-Darwinists today? Does anybody still lean that way? I mean, or is it just completely outmoded?
I mean, it's if we're talking like strictly neo-Darwinism in the original sense, then I would say no, because like punctuated equilibrium, epigenetics, all these other things, evo-devo, these are all phenomena that occurred after neo-Darwinism. So when Gould was around, when Kimura and all these other guys, they're doing this after. And so in a strict sense, I would say probably not. But some people are still like okay with calling themselves neo-Darwin, which like, that term kind of has a historical function, so I wouldn't call myself a neo-Darwinist, I'll say that. But some people prefer to use the term like extended synthesis, which again has kind of its own baggage. So a different set of baggage, which we're not going to talk about today, but a video will be coming out on that eventually. So stay tuned, everyone, for that. And so yeah, it depends. It kind of depends on some people. Some of the older crowd are okay with calling themselves neo-Darwinist, but I think a lot of the younger people are like,
move away from that label. It's kind of like the current movement in Christianity to move away from the evangelical label. It's what it's become in this country, you know,
right.
Kind of similar to that. But so, yeah. Well, I'll have a question for you later, but
Okay.
It's regarding punctuated equilibrium, but I'll ask you later.
Okay. So Andrew Cummings said, off-topic question: how do you feel about the quote explanation of common design, and do you think the high phylogenetic signal for the major clades of life refutes it? Yeah, I would say so. I mean, the part of the problem with Meyer. Actually, I guess this is a good time to get into that. So Meyer's main, he has essentially two major theses, and they are: the fossil record doesn't reflect a natural Cambrian explosion. It reflects intelligent design. And then the second one is, even if we are, being generous to the evolutionists, genetics can't help them in this regard.
Yeah.
So
if I can quote Meyer real quick on that first point, he says this. He says, the question that Darwin's early critics posed was this: how could he reconcile his theory of gradual evolution with a fossil record so discontinuous that it had given rise to the names of the major distinct periods of geologic time, particularly when the first animal forms seemed to spring into existence during the Cambrian, as if from nowhere.
Yeah.
And then he gives Darwin's response was, the historical response. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the funny thing about it is, about the geologic time periods is, well, originally they're named, kind of based on like different rock formations in most in like England and Germany in that area. And so they're named for these rock formations, and then they started doing what is called chronostratigraphy, where they're basically looking at these naturalists looking at the layers, and they're looking at the fossils within them, and they're starting to realize, okay, there's a series here. If we start over here, and then we go to England, where these other guys talking about this formation, we find a continuance of these same organisms. Well, that implies a continuity between them, right? And so later, though, when we start getting really into like paleontology, kind of after Darwin into the 1900s, we start finding like index fossils, and so we're correlating specific little time slices with very specific index fossils. But what the funny thing is they are gradual evolutionary sequences. It's like you have stasis, and then you have an environmental change, and so these species undergo, of like forams or conodonts or ammonites, whatever, then they undergo a slight change, and now they're different for a million years or so, and then there's another slight change, and now they're different again. And it's like, that seems really evolutionary. that seems pretty evolutionary.
Well, you don't know that God didn't just create new stuff every single day. I mean, maybe he just did that.
It's funny you say that, because when I had my Cambrian debate with Finding Truth, and Dapper and I were getting kind of frustrated because I'd asked him, when do you think the design event was that kicked off the Cambrian explosion? When do you think it was? And when we finally nailed him on an answer, he said God continuously works in evolution, which is like, that's entirely unfalsifiable. So,
exactly.
All right.
Okay, cool. It does nothing for me, but
yeah. So Meyer sort of bases that argument of the fossil record doesn't reflect doesn't reflect like a gradual evolution, and he kind of goes into sort of like the background on that. So, what did you think of that part of his case when he was talking about like the rapid appearance of the phyla? What were your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so my initial thought was something that Donald Prothero talks about in his book. Am I pronouncing his last name right? Prothero?
I think it's Prothero, but
Prothero?
it's all right.
Yeah, I don't know. Either way, but he emphasizes the fact that, number one, the Cambrian explosion is not really an explosion.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of an unfortunate term. It's kind of like the God particle or
Yes,
the Big Bang. It doesn't really communicate what it's supposed to be. And so, when you're talking about the Cambrian period, you're talking about what, anywhere between 10 to 30 million years, depending on who's dating it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a freaking long time.
Yeah.
And selection pressures, one thing that I don't think Meyer appreciates is that depending on the environment, depending on the context of the animal, selection pressures can generate new forms quickly. It's not something that has to happen over this very gradual hundreds of millions of years kind of thing. At least that's my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right. Yeah.
So it just seems like what Myers does then later is to attack punctuated equilibrium, because he thinks if he goes that route, he can immediately, squash any attempt to say, oh, well, no, you can have these quick forms emerge over shorter periods of time. He's not successful. I mean, but I understand why he takes that route. It's very smart. It's very smart of him to do that. He anticipated the argument and then he tries to cut it off at the pass.
Right.
Unfortunately, he doesn't really, from what I can tell, get into the most recent research on the subject, which you would know more about than I would. But so, yeah, I think when he talks about this, he's ignoring the fact that this is still a long time. This is not, we're not talking about thousands of years. We're talking about a very long period of time, really in the history of life. So
yeah,
at least complex life.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In more recent estimates, I kind of put it more like 20 to 30 million years. But what's more interesting than that is Cambrian explosion, in its technical geological sense, only refers to a segment of the Cambrian. So the actual radiation of organisms takes place. It's sort of three-pronged with regard to the Cambrian. And Meyer doesn't like this. He tries, again, to sidestep that. And because first you have a radiation at right before the end of the Ediacaran. So right before the end of the Precambrian, you have a radiation. You have the small shelly fauna, which again, Meyer kind of completely sidesteps that issue. He doesn't really talk about like the Cloudinids very much, or those guys. Or he doesn't mention the fact that the Cloudinids are continuous with the earliest Cambrian. So,
yeah, I was reading a criticism by a paleontologist at Calvin College, and he was reviewing a few books on evolution, but one of them was Stephen Meyer's book. And he says in the review, he says, the absence of any discussion of the small shellies along with the stratigraphic subdivisions of the uppermost Ediacaran and Cambrian stage 1 represents a significant lacuna in Meyer's treatment of the Cambrian explosion. Like, he just knows, he's deliberately avoided the subject.
Yes.
What does that say? Like, it's a huge deal. And this is a Christian. He's writing this.
Yeah. No, and again, he's right. Meyer does skip it because you have the soft-bodied organisms like Dickinsonia and all these other guys, and then you have the very first. Actually, I think Dickinsonia's organic walled, maybe. But anyways, you have the soft-bodied fossils, then you have the organic walled fossils, and then you have the first biomineralized fossils. How interesting! And the cool thing is, they're all continuous. So the soft-bodied ones appear first, and they kind of go for a while. Then after they appear, the organic walled fossils appear, and then after they appear, the biomineralized fossils appear. It's almost like it's an evolutionary sequence or something. It's crazy.
I was just going to say that. That's so weird. What a coincidence that God did it that way.
Right? Yeah. Which, of course, Meyer doesn't talk about. He doesn't try to... Even if we grant that it's like an intelligent design event, which one was? Were the soft-bodied intelligently designed, the organic walled one, the biomineralized ones? Was it only the first group of biomineralized ones were evolved, but the actual Cambrian ones were intelligently designed? There's no explanation
Mhm.
whatsoever. There's no model there. It's just intelligent design takes care of it. But which
Yeah,
part?
it's almost like this is kind of a crude example, but growing up, there was an evangelist who used to come to our church, and he used to complain about how this modern society was terrible. But he used to say, any hippie can burn a building, and his point was to say, you can cast questions, you can make doubt, have these doubts and destroy these belief systems, but how are you going to build it? That's what
Right.
and that's what Meyer's doing. Meyer
Sure,
wants to make everybody. Well, that's why it's called Darwin's doubt. So, but that's what he does. Is what he does it well. He does it very well. I think he plants these little seeds.
I mean, look, here's his book, which influenced no one in the paleontological community, but it's influenced a lot of people outside of that for the past 8 years. So,
yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's still happening. Peter, I think we can put him on timeout. So to go back to Andrew's question about the phylogenetic signal. So that's part of it. So we have these fossils appearing, and what's funny is Meyer actually kind of admits, yeah, we have some relatives of the Cambrian guys in the Precambrian, but that doesn't really matter. And it's like, yes, it does. you wanted the evidence, or it's like he asked for, where's the evidence that their ancestors were in the Precambrian? And he brings up, he kind of sideswipes Dickinsonia, which, in fairness, and as he points out correctly, there has been a lot of debate over what Dickinsonia is. And part of the reason is we had very few fossils of it because it's a soft-bodied organism. We didn't have the high resolution like microscopy technology that we now have and all that sort of stuff. And actually, if you read Gould's book, Wonderful Life, I don't know, have you read Wonderful Life?
No, I have not. Nope.
Oh, well, it's a good book. And he talks about how the technology has evolved. And because the technology has evolved, this allows us to have better resolution of different fossils.
You mean the technology was intelligently designed, Jackson?
I mean, yes, the technology was intelligently designed. There you go.
Just point that out.
Evolution fails again. Yeah. Defeated.
Shut it down.
And so because of this, because now we have more fossils and we have better resolution of these fossils, where researchers are now at the point like, yeah, Dickinsonia is like an animal, except for Greg Ritalik, who is still holding it was a lichen position, which like nobody else takes seriously. But other than him, pretty much everybody else is on board with like, yeah, it was an animal, it was an early animal, and so this is like the first inklings of animal life, as well as Kimberella and all these other guys. And we've had more fossils in the Precambrian since Darwin's doubt, and they're like, we're finding ever more clades of Cambrian critters in the Precambrian. Oh, weird.
Oh, this is one of the dangers of intelligent design, is that it's that God of the gaps argument, Yeah. What is it? Was it Neil deGrasse Tyson says when you use that argument, God becomes an ever receding pocket of ignorance. That science comes in and figures it out. It's just a dangerous track to take.
Right.
And,
I mean, you're right. Meyer is necessarily proposing that we're not going to find these things.
Mm-hmm.
That we will never find the ancestors of Cambrian critters in the Precambrian. And so the fact that we're finding like annelids and panarthropods and things like that in the late Precambrian is like, this is specifically not predicted by Meyer and the intelligent design crowd.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so when we actually get into the Cambrian, and this comes back to the question that's been posed. But so yes, I do think that the high phylogenetic signal from major clades refutes Meyer, because as Just a Walking Fish pointed out, Meyer's kind of under the idea that each phylum is a separate creation. At least that's the way he kind of paints it, which is not is not really a thing. I guess is one way of putting it. A phylum is not is an arbitrary construct that we invented for taxonomic purposes, right? And so when you get into if you unite all the arthropods, all the extant things we consider arthropods, it's like, okay, yeah, they have jointed appendages, a cuticular exoskeleton, all this sort of stuff. And then we look to their next closest relatives, which are velvet worms, and we're like, hey, they also have a bunch of characters in common with arthropods. And hey, the tardigrades also have a bunch of characters in common with arthropods and velvet worms. Is this evolution or is this intelligent design? Because they form a superphylum. They're like so closely related to each other. I mean, they were all sort of appearing right around the same time, that researchers have been like kind of battling out as to who's more closely related to who because of how close they are all to each other. And so it's like, does that mean they were all the common ancestor was created of panarthropods? You know, yes, Meyer does accept nested hierarchies, but only to about the phylum level. After that, he's just like, meh. It's kind of hard to tell because intelligent design people, and if RJ were here, he'd be saying this much better than I can. Intelligent design people, you know about baraminology. Intelligent design people also have to do a sort of baraminology, but on a much larger scale, but they don't. They specifically avoid doing it. And so,
I wonder why.
Right, yeah, I wonder why. And somebody asked, I think it may have been Walker, does Meyer consider humans a chordate or descended from chordates? Well, all the chordates are descended from each other except for humans. Wink, 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 wink. We're separate. Yeah, yes, it was Walker.
Special creation. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you go, I guarantee, if you were to ask Meyer, like, hey, do you think we're descended from like Hycoichthyes? He'd be like, oh no, oh no, 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 no. You know, he would not be okay with that. Or in fact, I wonder if he'd even be okay with like, do you think elephants are descended from Hycoichthyes? Because there's more information in an elephant, isn't there? It's way bigger. It's got a trunk. I mean, this is new information, right? So, you know, makes you wonder. But again, it's that I don't know if it's intentionally vague, but it is vague. He is very vague with his definite model.
Model, yeah.
Yeah. The other sort of side of that coin is he talks about the lack of transitional fossils, not just between the Precambrian and Cambrian, but also within the Cambrian.
Yeah.
What are your
I don't know enough about the transitional fossils. I mean, this is a common creationist argument.
Right.
Usually it's delivered out of ignorance. But obviously, it's obviously true that there's going to be missing transitions just because of the nature of fossilization. And it's never helpful to say every form is a transitional form. I mean, it's true, but it's also useless, especially when you're talking to a creationist, because they're addressing something specific. But so what transitions do we have? There's obviously a progression. You've already talked about this progression from these soft-shelled organisms to more, calcified shells. There's obviously this evolution that we can see. Can we speak of specific transitions?
Yeah.
Even in the Cambrian and between the Precambrian and the Cambrian.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are some examples? I mean,
between the Precambrian and Cambrian, it's so there are a few fossils which are interpreted as so for instance, Kimberella. There's been a lot of debate over Kimberella because again, it's a soft-bodied organism, or at least a very lightly calcified organism, such that without very good microscopes and things, we're gonna have a hard time figuring out what it is and Lagerstadt and all that. And so, Kimberella is considered like a basal member of the group. It was called Lophotrochozoa, but what that means is it's a primitive member of the group that contains like earthworms and bivalves and flatworms and brachiopods. All the guys who aren't like more closely related to arthropods, like tardigrades, velvet worms, and
Mhm.
arthropods. Well, most of the other guys in that major group, the protostomes, are members of Lophotrochozoa, and so they're all brachiopods, mollusks, annelids. So yeah, Kimberella is kind of at the very base of that group, which is also in the Precambrian. Huh, weird. But and so once you kind of cross over, if you're looking at say just the mollusk line, for instance, if you as soon as you cross over into the early Cambrian, you get these like basal mollusks. You get things like Halkieria, which looks kind of like a flatworm with bivalve shells on both ends. It's got a bivalve shell on both ends, and it's got a close relative called Orthroxanchus, which is like a flatworm with just a mollusk shell on one end. And so it's like this is what the like ancestor of mollusca probably looked like. And it's right at the start of the Cambrian. And you have a Wiwaxia, which is another one, also probably like right at the base of mollusca. And then we get like a radiation of the mollusks. They start out real small, and then they get bigger over time.
So let me ask you this then. So these potential transitions that you're mentioning,
mm-hmm.
Are these organisms that have been discovered only since 2013, or have they been known for? So what you're telling me then, Jackson, this is what you're telling me, is Meyer is either willfully ignorant or mischaracterizing the data about these transitions to accommodate his argument. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not sure if I'd say it in those exact words, but I mean, I probably would say those exact words.
You would say Meyer's a liar, which is catchy because it rhymes.
Meyer's a liar. I mean, that is funny. I would probably say he's looking. I'm not sure if I'd say he's a liar per se. I think I would say he is looking for anything that he's coming at this from a non-paleontology approach. And, people are like, oh, well, he got his bachelor's in geology. Geology is not paleontology. I'm sorry. They are not the same thing. Biology is not the same thing as paleontology. These are vastly different fields. Now, they require each other. There's overlap, but they are not the same. And so if you ask a geologist to like, hey, will you look at this fossil for me? They're going to be like, why? And so, yeah, these are non-overlapping. These are overlapping fields, but they're not the same field, and that's the important distinction. And so, though Meyer has a knowledge of geology, he's not a paleontologist. So he's coming at this from an outside approach, and he's looking for things which support him, but also like he's just probably not aware of so much of the research, despite writing a massive tome, just because he's not. It's not his field. He's not used to this sort of stuff. And despite the large amount of papers he did actually read for this, it's kind of surprising how many papers he left out. Very important papers.
Oh yeah,
that he left out.
That was a common criticism I read in some forums of his book. Is just that he just left out much stuff. It's
to give an example that he actually did talk about in Darwin's Doubt. He brings up the arthropods a lot because, and he brings them up because he obviously read Wonderful Life, and he's like, aha. One of the things about Wonderful Life, though I like it as a whole, is Gould kind of, I think, overplays like the weirdness of the Burgess shale fauna, and I think that's also a product of the fact that he was writing in 1987 when they were still trying to figure out what a lot of these things were.
30 years ago,
yeah, and Meyer kind of comes along like, oh, this book, this is it. It's like, this was written 30 years ago, man. Things are a little bit different now. And so, to give an example, Meyer talks about the arthropods, and he brings up Anomalocaris, and he brings up like Anomalocaris, Opabinia, Morella, and Trilobites all in one breath. You just say he's just say the arthropods of the Cambrian and name drop all of these. Well, part of the problem is Meyer does not like giving us phylogenies, which again, a big surprise, right? But if we were to look at a phylogeny of arthropods, you would see that Anomalocaris and Opabinia do not nest within the range of extant arthropods. They were primitive arthropods. Whoa. Some might even call them transitional arthropods.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so Meyer just kind of is like, wow, these things are weird. No idea where they came from. Let's go look at something else and marvel at how weird it is. And
he's got pretty pictures of them, though, in the book.
Oh, yes, absolutely. There are some beautiful fossils from Burgess Shale and the Changjiang and Sirius Passet and all that. But a discussion of phylogenetics would have been really useful. And he just kind of flips it off.
Yeah, which again speaks to what his motive is for writing this. It's just to burn the house down. It's not to create a new edifice. It's just to burn it all down.
Yeah, exactly. Or same with the chordates. He talks about like the Unanozoan and Hycoichthys, and he's like, aha, chordates in the Cambrian. Where do they come from? Look at them. They're little wormy things. They look nothing like pretty much anything except lanceolets today. Everything else has has vertebrae, and all this other stuff. And so it's like he just kind of brings them up to drop them. Just to name drop them, be like, aha, another phylum present without ancestors, right?
As if that proves anything.
Yeah.
Anything.
And these guys, hasten to add, are like this long. They're like maybe that long, and they're soft. They're totally soft-bodied. So, which is kind of another criticism is that the major fossil sites that Meyer talks about, Burgess Shale, Sirius Passet, and Changjiang, which falls into the, I don't know how to pronounce it, Mao Tianchen shales. So those three are the big ones, but they're all like Middle Cambrian to Late Cambrian. Where are the early Cambrian Lagerstätte, the major fossil deposits? Well, there aren't that many. And so our window into that time is severely minimalized because we don't have a lot of fossil deposits, a lot of really, really good fossil deposits into the super early Cambrian. We have a few here and there, and we get a lot of like shelled critters. And that's about it. And so it's kind of easy to look at that and I think draw like, they just came out of nowhere. It's like, no.
Yeah, it's the wrong conclusion.
Yeah, it is indeed the wrong conclusion. Yeah,
I mean, obviously Jackson, but I'm just saying, like, based on his MO, it's kind of but it's almost like what Darwin argued is, the incompleteness of the fossil record is based on how fossilization works. It almost, and maybe I'm playing devil's advocate here, but it's almost a just so story.
Yeah.
What would you say? What would you say to that?
Well, I would say the Cambrian, he singles out the Cambrian explosion. Notice they're not making this argument for any of the other major radiations in the Paleozoic. They don't make this argument for the Cenozoic or the Paleogene radiation of mammals. They don't make this argument for the Triassic radiation of diapsids or the Jurassic radiation of dinosaurs. This argument only surfaces in one place. That's the place where we have very few fossil deposits. What a surprise. Because at the boundary between the Mesozoic, the time of dinosaurs, and the Cenozoic, the age of the mammals, we have fossils on both sides. We know what the mammals look like before the Cenozoic. They were all little shrew critters.
Yeah,
they were all very
rodents.
little, like little rodent kind of guys. And then immediately after the dinosaurs get wiped out, we see a huge flowering. But we know they were there. We have their fossils. Whereas, and the same is true of the dinosaurs. We know dinosaurs were in the Triassic. They were just little, or most of them were little. There weren't very many large ones. And then into the Jurassic, and boom, huge flowering out of lineages. It's only in this one instance where we're going so far back, we're now we're having problems actually seeing the fossils because of how small they are and how soft-bodied many of them are, that this argument crops up. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
No, yeah, I agree. Well, it's a common canard where creationists, will harp on origin of life issues because, I mean, we don't have super great answers yet. It's just because we just don't know. And the history of science has shown us, we eventually will figure this out. It's just going to take some time. So the Cambrian is one of those time periods where we don't have the best data just because of the nature of the time. But it speaks to like you said, it does show this gradual, not gradual, but this evolutionary progression. Undoubtedly, I mean, without a doubt, you would have to completely ignore the rest of evolutionary history to make this special case to build your argument for intelligent design, which is what Meyer does. He harps on this one period that like you talked about, and bless his heart. I mean, he tried.
He tried. Yeah, he gave it his best effort. He certainly gave it a whack. And so his both kind of sides of the fossil argument coin aren't really there. It's the idea that we both don't have predecessors or in the Cambrian when we're starting to like find more and more and more, because another part of the problem is you have to know where to look for fossils. Fossils aren't just everywhere. They're in specific localities around the world, right? And there's a reason for that. You have to look for areas which are not like super highly metamorphosed or, haven't been eroded or whatever. You have to look in, and those aren't everywhere. They're not everywhere. And so you have to look in particular places. And the fact that, a lot of fossil deposits have been lost to history. And that's part of the problem. And so, both. And there's the geochemistry aspect of it, where if you actually look at like the geochemistry of the rocks, there are changes. There are like the carbon cycle was changing, and the redox chemistry of the ocean and the oxygen levels were all changing at the end of the Precambrian. And again, that's kind of interesting. And then we have this big radiation. And so both kind of aspects, both no transitional fossils before and no transitional fossils during, fall apart when you examine the broader context of the data that Meyer, for some reason, leaves out. Unknown reason. We're just scratching our heads over here. And then there's the other aspect of it, which is the genetics argument. So it's like, even if we grant that the evolution occur, or how could the mutations occur, which necessarily had to have happened to lead to arthropods and chordates and all this sort of stuff? How could that have happened in such a tiny 30 million year frame, right? It's impossible. And so he relies a lot on the math of Douglas Axe. And this is not the first book he did it. He also mentions he did it in Signature in the Cell. The only problem is the math is bogus.
Yeah, that's one of the criticisms I saw was even people who were maybe former colleagues, went to school with Axe, were like, no, he's completely wrong. I mean, I don't get the math, but they were like adamant that Axe has missed some data. There's been a lot that's happened since his arguments have been made. And so Meyer, once again, relies on outmoded information to make his argument.
Yes. Yeah. Meyer's number was like 1 in 10 to the 72nd or something like that. It's a ludicrously large number. And he's like, this is the probability of like a protein evolving, right? Of like hitting the correct sequence space to generate a functional protein. It's like, that's numerous orders of magnitude off. Because, and you can demonstrate that. We don't have to do it, theoretically, because the math to get those numbers, there is a bit of a history to those numbers. I think he also mentions Sauer and a couple other people who've done similar calculations. And so you can get these really big numbers, like of only one in a number of folds of this protein would work by basically mutating like a small section of it and then being like, okay, only this many of this section worked. And so then we just multiply that by, however long like the protein is. And or expand that. And there you go. That's how many protein folds would actually work. And it's like, no. And you can, because we can experimentally change, proteins. There's a really cool study, which also was published before 2013, so Meyer could have been aware of it.
I was going to ask.
I mean, I wouldn't pick on him for, like, he couldn't have, like, talked about Eulingia, because Eulingia wasn't discovered until 2019. So it's like, okay, I can't fault him for that, even though I can fault him for a bunch of fossils he did fail to bring up, which were discovered before. But, I can't fault him for that. No, we can fault him for this because it was around. This study was around before he wrote. And he's, like, supposed to be the big guy on this, the point man. Well, there's a really cool study where these researchers took a protein and they evolved it in E. coli to be able to excise HIV DNA. The function of it was not to recognize an HIV sequence, but a different type of sequence. And so it could cut out this sequence, and this original sequence, which is called a long terminal repeat. And these researchers were like, okay, the closest HIV sequence to this is this one. So could we possibly evolve that protein, which cuts out this long terminal repeat, into one which cuts out the HIV long terminal repeat? And it turns out, yes, you can. And they did, like, I think it was 126 iterations or something like that, which, that's not a lot. Bacteria reproduce very quickly, and so it's like, it only took you 126 iterations to produce a protein which has which recognizes a totally new sequence. Okay. Seems like it's a lot easier than 1 in 10 to the 72nd.
Yeah. I wonder why he left that out.
Yeah, it has to be complex, big numbers. Ooh, evolutionists can't explain this. Boom.
Which, I mean, again, like I said before, that has a rhetorical effect for readers.
Yes.
You're kind of like, wow, this is the God is so big.
Mm-hmm.
That's the it works. I get it. Of course, I was a creationist for a long time, so I read books like that. So you get that feeling of awe. These big numbers.
Yeah,
but like you said,
yeah, absolutely. Andrew Cumming asks, how do you feel about the concept of heterochrony and how the developmental mechanisms behind it generate novel morphology? Yes, absolutely.
I'd like to speak to that, Jackson, if I could.
Go ahead.
I have no idea. Back to you, Jackson.
So heterochrony is the changing of timing of development of different parts. To sort of bring it home to humans, we are basically chimps that never grew up. We're chimp babies. And so if you look at the skull of a human and a baby chimp, we look very similar. We have these like huge orbits. We have a face which is hypognathic rather than the very long prognathic face of chimps.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so chimps, as they grow older, their face like elongates, it becomes prognathic, but it's not like that when they're first born. They look very similar to humans.
Flat-faced, yeah.
Yeah. And so what we did basically was we truncated development of the face. And so if you look at human fossils, like the prognathism gets less and less and less. If you look at like Sahelanthropus versus Australopithecus versus Homo habilis, Homo erectus, it's like the face keeps getting less and less prognathic. So we truncated our development. We stopped developing in a particular way, and that's part of what allowed our brain to get big and all this other stuff. And so that's technically called neoteny, but it falls under heterochrony, the changing of timing of development. And so, yeah, that happens, in all the different organismal lineages when they can't see it in real time in the lab. Well, I would say you can compare different groups of organisms. You can we figured out for humans, because we can look at our fossil record, we can look at our developmental data, we can look at the developmental data for chimps and compare those, and we see, oh, they start like this. They start with our condition, and and then progress to something else, and then, oh, are you, Peter? And then it's the same with axolotls, which I actually have right over there. I have my axolotl Darwin. Axolotls are salamanders that never grew up. Well, yeah, you would use molecular sequencing because you develop a phylogeny, you see who's most closely related to who, and then you compare their differences, and then you inquire as to why they have these differences, and so that's how you can generate this hypothesis of heterochrony. So axolotls are a group of salamanders, right? But salamanders normally they lose their gills and then they transition to land. Axolotls don't do that. They retain their gills and they live in water throughout their whole lives. So that's another example of neoteny. And so yeah, this happens. It happens in all the different. And again, to come back to Meyer, these heterochronic changes are because of Hox genes. And we were talking about that before we opened. Meyer spends 2 or 3 pages talking about Hox genes.
Let's see. I was trying to look at the index to see exactly how many pages he spends on them. Let's see. It's like a ridiculously small amount.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh yeah. It's like 317 to 321.
All right, 4 pages. Yeah. So he spends
285, 287. Yes, no, nothing at all.
Yeah, he spends 4 or 5 whole pages talking about a subject which is integral to understanding the genetic evolution in the Cambrian explosion. And guess what? This would inform your understanding of the Cambrian, and he just kind of goes, it doesn't matter. He brings it up. He talks about the Antennapedia experiment and kind of misunderstands why it happened. The Antennapedia experiment was a proof of concept. That's all it was. It basically said, it was basically okay, so what do Hox genes do? And if you tweak them, if you change where they express, they generate the whole structure that they are, or they generate a whole structure, I should say. So, for instance, you have PAX6, which is the gene which underpins the development of the eye. You can take the PAX6 from a mouse and transfer it to a fly, and they will still make an eye. They will still make an eye. And so it's the same.
Isn't God amazing?
God is just absolutely amazing. The best. Oh, there you go. Amen. You're right. And so it, I mean, that's what did they say? That's common design, right?
Yeah, exactly. So,
common design, but also uncommon design. But was that a different God who did the uncommon design? Who refuted our not traits? I don't know about that. That seems to be still a pretty good hypothesis among, as far as I'm aware, that's still a running hypothesis among anthropologists. And I mean, it's not just us who have neotenic traits. They are widely distributed among different organisms. So I don't know. I haven't seen that video, but as far as I'm aware, because it's not just our face, it's also the direction of, for instance, the vaginal opening. That's another neotenic trait. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff. So I don't know. I haven't seen that video, but I will go watch it, I guess. We're talking about Hox genes. Yes. So Hox genes are something that would inform your understanding of the evolution of these organisms. As I showed with Finding Truth, when intelligent design people talk about information, a discussion which should reference Hox genes, they have no clue how to incorporate Hox genes into the discussion. There's no there because they're like, oh, Hox genes are just switches. They're just on and off switches. Well, yes, but if you duplicate the switch, And so you now have like another segment. You have another pair of arms, for instance. That's kind of important. What was it? So like arthropods and velvet worms and tardigrades, they have a whole bunch of arms. They have like lots and lots of pairs of arms. And these we agree that we are neonatal primates. I don't know. If you duplicate a Hox gene, then you get another segment. And so if you look at like spiders versus millipedes, for instance, you duplicating the Hox genes a whole bunch of times to generate lots and lots and lots of segments, as opposed to just a few segments. And so but again, changes and changes in the amount or timing of expression can result too, so it's not just a switch. Exactly right. Yeah. So so needless to say, Meyer's coverage of the genetics is just as good as his coverage of the fossils. Do you have are there any other like thoughts or points you want to make about or with regard to like the genetics of it or that argument?
Yeah, no, I see a lot of that is just so over my head that it's hard to make heads or tails of it. I mean, apart from the criticism of his omission, especially the Hox genes, which is just huge. I really don't. It's not something I'm familiar enough with to speak about intelligently.
Oh, well, that's all right. Well,
I could make stuff up. I could lie.
I could make stuff up.
I mean, I could do that.
I mean, I guess. So I guess then we'll move on. So I guess it should be pretty clear at this point that Meyer leaves out a lot of stuff. And he wrote a huge book. This book's like 500 pages.
Yeah.
And he left out a lot of stuff. Not just like little minutia. I mean, okay, we don't have to talk about every single Cambrian fossil. That's fine. But come on. We need to have a better discussion of these things than what Meyer does, even though he presents a tome. So we'll move on to like the third section, I guess. So it's kind of the history, and then the actual arguments, and then the altar call. No, definitely not an altar call. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that. I mean, the last chapter is literally just an altar call. That's all it is.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
But the third section, he brings up intelligent design as a concept. He's like, aha, I have a way to solve all of these these fatal flaws in evolution and its intelligent design. So what were your thoughts on that section?
It's like any other book you read about any other whether it's Michael Behe or even Young Earth creationists. It's the same kind of stuff where it's evolution can't explain evolution the way I've presented it can't explain X. Therefore, there has to be some intelligent agent behind it. And they're always wary of not quite saying it was God because they kind of like want to leave that out.
Right.
But yeah, so I don't even know where to begin with him. It's wow. Yeah,
it's bad because that's his whole lead up is to his God. I mean, that at the end of the day, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you can try to swaddle it in as many science-sounding arguments as you want, but at the end of the day, that's where it goes. It's to God. It's come on, come be a Christian and give up Darwin.
Well, and he spends some time because he doesn't want to rehash what he wrote in Signature of the Cell.
Right.
So, but he's really trying to play on this idea that there are these very specific ways that evolution can account for X, and make this what is essentially a cumulative case. Like he's trying to build his argument based on his previous book.
Right.
But like you said earlier, and I thought that was a good point. You said they don't make these arguments about later animal forms, dinosaurs and in mammals. They only do it at these points in the history of life where we just don't have all the data.
Yeah.
It's the only time they make it. And to me, it's so dangerous to do that, because when your argument for God rests on what you do not know, the moment you know, you've destroyed your argument for God. And I just don't know why they argue that way. It does not make sense to me.
Well, I mean, they have to, and I think it's very funny that Meyer is like, this is not a God of the Gaps argument. He takes great pains to say it's not God of the Gaps.
Yeah,
and it's like, but isn't it though? But I mean, he tries to sideswipe that by saying, okay, well, here are my specific predictions for what we should see if if the Cambrian were intelligently designed rather than an evolutionary event. And he says, like, the funny thing is, he makes the top-down he's like, there's top-down complexity, when it's like, that's a fault of the quirk of our taxonomy. That's not really an argument. So for instance, what I mean is, if you say the first instance of like an arthropod is like Opabinia, for instance, that's one of the most basally derived arthropods, and you take that. I'm trying to think of like how to formulate this. You have to say, here is an arthropod. It's a member. It's the first member of the phylum Arthropoda. But where are the other arthropods that were before Opabinia? You can't really do that. Because this is how taxonomy works. Either because we are looking at this from our vantage point. If we were doing zoology in the Cambrian, would we say like Opabinia and Hallucigenia were different phyla? Probably not. We'd probably say they were maybe like different classes within the same panarthropod phylum. But the problem is, we're looking at this from so far on that these distinctions, we have crafted these distinctions, these phylogenetic distinctions, into our taxonomy. And as a result, once you kind of get to like the most basally derived ancestor, and then you ask, well, where's the next one that's also in this phylum? There isn't. Because you're out of the phylum then. You're in part of the larger category. But then it's like, oh, but then the larger category appeared first, and then the phylum. And then, again, this is a quirk of our taxonomy. This is just how we make distinctions. Or it's like the first animal. Aha! The first member of the entire kingdom showed up, before everybody else. Well, yeah, they had to. This is just how it works. And so it's a word game. It's a very like disingenuous word game. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Some theists use the golden ratio as an argument for design. How do you counter that? I mean, so not all. Okay, so for instance, the golden ratio in like a snail shell, it's neat, but that's not all. That's not how all snail shells are. That's only how a subset of snail shells are, and we know that the first snails were not like that. So that is an evolved shell design, quote. So for instance, like the modern group of gastropoda, clams and snails, they have a huge variety. Do I have it? I do have it. I have a poster on the wall over here, and it's got this huge variety of snail shells. Now, snail shells can be either this inline spiral, or they can be a cone spiral, so they go up like this. Mm-hmm. Or there's one really weird guy, and his is like, it's not a tight coil. It's like this very long wormy coil, where the sides don't touch. It's very, very weird. But the ones who have that golden ratio are just a subset within that. They're just one of the snail groups. And so if you want to say, well, this group was designed, you'd have to say it was like designed to the exclusion of all the other ones who don't have this design. So it becomes a very very weird argument.
Mm-hmm.
Which is
Selective.
kind of the same.
It's very selective.
Yes, it's very selective, which is also kind of how Meyer makes his like Cloudina, for instance, which is a Precambrian organism which lasts into the early Cambrian and overlaps with Cambrian fauna, like Halkieria. Well, if the start of the Cambrian 542 million years ago is the design event, does that mean the later Cloudinids were designed separately from the earlier Cloudinids?
Duh.
I mean, they're not super different. They're a little different, but they're not super different. But you have to wonder, does Meyer think that like God like creates a set of organisms and kills off most of them, but not all of them, and then like starts designing the next group? And so there's kind of this overlap between the groups.
Unintelligent design, yeah.
Which I don't know if you saw it. I had a debate with Fazal Rana, and I brought that point up to him because he was like, "Oh, there's no continuity between like the Mesozoic, Cenozoic, or the Precambrian, Cambrian." I was like, "Yes, there are, and here are some examples." And he kind of went, "Oh, interesting."
Who are you who are so wise in the ways of science?
I mean, I really like that discussion, and I like Dr. Rana. He's a good guy, and it's just I think about that a lot because it's like you would expect discontinuity, I think, right? If this were a design event, just like totally different thing, or one set of thing, no more thing, totally separate thing, no relation, which is kind of what Meyer implies, like no Cambrian animals, then Cambrian animals all of a sudden. No relation, no connection. And it's like, well, that's not technically true. There is an overlap. There's a degree of overlap between these two. And of course, he doesn't discuss that. And I've been doing some research, and I've been reading more recent papers, which are mostly by Gunter Beckley, because Casey Luskin pretty much stopped writing, which are trying to defend Darwin's doubt. The most recent defenders of Darwin's doubt. And Beckley never discusses what a model is. He's all like, all these things we're finding in the Precambrian don't matter because we can't assign them to like specific groups. Or he's like, he casts doubt on the distinctions of really? Like, what is Dickinsonia, what is Kimberella? Yes, those are his actual arguments. They're terrible.
That's his wow.
It's very funny. And so like when he talks about Cloudina, he talks about how like because it is probably an annelid. It's probably an early annelid from the most recent discoveries. They found like part of its gut has been phosphatized, and Beckley's like, well, I don't agree with them. Well, cool. But even if he's like, well, even if it is, it still doesn't save the Darwinists, which again is another term they love to use. But it's like, okay, but even if it is an annelid, how does it fit into your model? No, we don't care. Doesn't matter. We don't think about it.
Model? What model? We don't need to accommodate anything.
Yeah. So it's all very bad. It never got better. They never thought, wow, all these people were right about our book. We were wrong. So we're gonna change our view. No, that never happened. In fact, they dug their heels even harder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and even like gave up concessions that Meyer was like, yeah, I don't mind conceding this. Beckley's like, no, concede nothing. So at any rate, well, we've been going over an hour at this point, and I don't want to hold you too long. And so, are there any other like points or arguments that you want to field, or thoughts you might have?
No, I do have a question for you though. So, I mentioned it earlier about punctuated equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe it's a two-part question. So, how is that argument in vogue, and in what ways is it incorporated into the modern synthesis? So,
the thing about Meyer is he treats punctuated equilibrium is not a mechanism; it's a trend. It's a pattern in the evolution.
Yeah, it's an observation. Yeah, basically.
And so it's really weird to hear people use it like punctuated equilibrium doesn't save Darwinism. It's not a mechanism. It's an observation of the pattern, right?
Yeah.
Like, is it in vogue? Yes. Yeah. Well, actually, in fairness, punctuated equilibrium never replaced phyletic gradualism. They're both working together and in different ways.
Yeah, which is because creationists, back when I was in the 90s reading all of this, the tendency was to put gradual evolution versus, put them in contrast or against one another to undermine the theory in general.
Yes.
But
yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And that was one of the big argument points was like Philip Gingrich and Richard Dawkins and the others who were initially against punctuated equilibrium were like, no. Here are these examples of phyletic gradualism in the fossil record. Well, yes, you're both right. They both happen. Things, undergo stasis, and then they can rapidly evolve if the ecological conditions change. Or
especially after the flood.
Especially after the flood. Yes, exactly. Oh, man. Oh, I talk for another day. We could just rant all day about that. But yeah, they both happen, right? We observe stasis and rapid evolution as well as the sort of constant speedism, which is what Darwin kind of expected. And so yeah, they're both in there.
Well, that answers that question.
Was that the first part or the second part?
That ended up being both. So you got both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, haha. Things like full stasis don't exist. Well, yes. Stasis is kind of a subjective term. If you say, well, the coelacanths have been static for, 400 million years, it's like, no. The two species of modern coelacanth, Latimeria, separated like 6 million years ago. So clearly, they're not living fossils. They've only been around, the species, for less than 6 million years. So it's like that's not really stasis. They're not the same as the ones who lived 300 million years ago. They're different genera and species. There has been evolution. And so, saying, like full stasis, or true stasis, it is subjective. It's like, it kind of looks like this, who lived a long time ago. Horseshoe crabs are another example. And I get people at the aquarium saying that, like, haven't horseshoe crabs been around for a long time? Well, yes, the total group, Ziphisura, has been around for a long time, but the modern species have not been around for that long, for 400 million years. So, yeah.
Do you get a bunch of creationists come to the aquarium to make snide remarks?
Not usually, no. I have heard, occasionally I'll get things like, like, oh wow, wonderful design, and that was something I heard not like the other day. It was like, wow, the paddlefish is wonderfully designed, and I was like, so these are adaptations to its environment. I didn't, I'm not gonna say something like no. I'm gonna be like, yeah. So these, these help it in this environment in this way because it only needs the paddlefish only needs like its long nose to help generate the electro sensing because it has crap eyesight. Its eyes are like super tiny. It's like, yeah, that's real intelligent design. Good job. I had to evolve this new structure because I can't see. Thanks, God. Should the term living fossil be thrown out? Funny enough, Darwin actually was the one who came up with that to describe. He came up with it to describe the platypus and gars, if I remember correctly, and I think lungfish. I think those three were his his main three. And so, and also Lingula. Lingula was another one, which is a brachiopod genus. And there's been a lot of debate over whether that one genus actually goes all the way back to the Cambrian or not, or whether that shell morphology has been independently evolved a whole bunch of times. And it turns it probably did. And so it's kind of the thinking now. So I take it the Discovery Institute doesn't get the Jackson Wheat seal of approval. That would be correct. Yeah, no, they get a definite wrong. So So at any rate, any further thoughts or final thoughts, closing thoughts?
No. This was fun, and I've learned quite a bit since this is not my area of expertise at all, and so I appreciate your thoughts on this and your insights. Because again, when you come to a book, most of Meyer's readers are going to come to that book, and they're not going to know a lot of what you know, a lot of what the experts know, and so for someone like me who's just an amateur, it's helpful to have somebody who can address these issues and clarify and provide the nuance that often creationist literature just lacks. So
well, in that case, for our next talk, I'll have to read like a Richard Carrier book, and then you can tell me all the ways it's wrong, because I won't know how to rebut that. So
yeah, we won't be friends anymore if you do that. So
you're like, why would you subject me to this?
No.
I mean, I mean,
Jesus, sperm in outer space. No. No.
I mean, because I'm not a history person, and so like if I just read it, I wouldn't know.
Hey, neither is Richard Carrier. That's interesting.
Am I detecting a little bit of salt there? Just a little.
I'm reading his book on the historicity of Jesus a second time, and it's just taken me so, because it's just, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's a topic for another day.
I mean, yeah, we'll definitely have to. Oh, I like the KH says that I remember as a kid, my mom got me a series of children's animal books from a Christian bookstore about how wonderfully designed different species were, and then responded with, "A joke is on them. Those books got me interested in animals, and now I'm studying to become an evolutionary biologist." Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough.
Very good.
So I don't know. Maybe we will do that. Maybe I'll read some bad history, and then I'll have you back on. You can tell me why all the history is wrong.
You hate me.
Yes, Peter's right. There's only one true book. The rocks were there, and so if you haven't got that, why not? You definitely should if you like busting creationism. Mine's on the shelf way over there. It's too far. But have you gotten through it, or how far in it have you gotten?
No, I haven't had a chance to. I've used it quite a bit for the index, because you guys have a really amazing index. The way
you have RJ to
thank
thank for that.
Oh, really? Okay, yes, it's very useful. So when I was reading Meyer's book and just looking for criticisms of some of his arguments, I used the hell out of that index. And I also like these little inlets you do. I'm trying to think. Let's see if I can
it's also RJ.
Yeah, these are really helpful. Like they're sprinkled throughout the book, and it almost feels like a textbook.
We kind of had to do that because I'm a footnote person, and RJ is just a sort of like write the body sort of person. And I was like, I kind of will get to something, and I'll be like, okay, well, here's a couple little notes about that. And then RJ, so like the way we wrote most of them is like I'd kind of draft it, send it to RJ. He'd add way more stuff, and then he'd send it back. I'd look it over again, and then we'd put it in. And so RJ kind of towards the end is we're like finalizing the how to put everything in. Yeah. Citations, how to put everything on the page and all that. RJ's like, why don't we turn these footnotes into like info boxes?
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so then yeah, you're right. It looks kind of like a textbook now. And so it's
very useful for that. I mean, it's a one-stop shop for sure for a lot of bad creationist arguments. And it's got a great bibliography, which is what I look for in a book. I want to see who you're citing, and
everybody.
Exactly. It's unbelievable how many people you guys cite. It's crazy.
RJ's been working on this sort of stuff for 30 plus years, and he has his tip projects, and so he draws. Like I said, RJ has an encyclopedic knowledge of like everything. I once made a joke. The only thing he doesn't know about is 1860s shoe fashion, and RJ said, "Well, actually," and then proceeded to talk about 1860s shoe fashions. And so I never made a joke like that again. So yeah,
pretty good.
But yes, RJ has a truly encyclopedic knowledge, and so he's been doing this for such a long time, and he knew a lot of the sources to draw on, and of course working together. So like my um my sort of coming at it as like a new person in this, and versus he's been doing this for a long time, and so we kind of meet in the middle, right? Where like he's looking at it from his approach, and I'm looking at it from my approach, and so we have both our own ways of looking at this and doing it all. And
Yeah,
so
that's useful.
my question for you is when are you going to write a book, sir? I would definitely read a book that you write.
Man, I did that last season of the podcast Amateur Exegesis, and I posted the scripts on my website, and I'll tell you what, I probably did well over 150 pages in writing for scripts.
Yeah.
And not including the footnotes. It was a book in and of itself, just to do this podcast. It took a lot of research, a lot of writing, it was very time consuming. So I don't know. One day I'll write something. I'd like to do it on the New Testament, and kind of like what Josh Bowen, with his book on that he just came out with, the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, Volume 1.
Yep.
I mean, what a great idea! Like, really great idea. He's such a smart guy, anyways. Just real nice, really just brilliant. So I think one day I'd like to do something like that, but maybe for the New Testament. But we'll see.
Absolutely, yeah, heck yeah. I think that'd be awesome. So, and for anyone, if you want to find more stuff that he has done, that Amateur Exegete has done, we put his blog in the down part, the doobly doo, and so you can go check that out and listen to his podcast, all kinds of awesome stuff that he does, because you are truly a wealth of knowledge on biblical history, and
thank you.
I really do enjoy reading your stuff. And so, on that note, I suppose we shall be signing off. It's been an hour and a half. Thank you for coming on. Thanks everybody for watching. And we will see you all next time. So